Hey everyone, we're going to be flying here over the Gulf of Corinth and one of its most highly prized locations in the area, the site of Delphi here, over by the Mount Parnassus region. And this is a very, very important religious site, home to, well, the Temple of Apollo and his spokesperson, essentially the Oracle of Delphi. So just to give you a bit of context on what's going on here, well, in this area, it's actually a religious site that dates back to, well, some would have it, the 1400s BC. So very important area with a lot of religious significance, in part due to its proximity to the high mountains nearby, which were associated with the gods, as well as you can see down looking at the sides here, some streams coming by. There were some natural springs as well, all of these having important religious significance with purity. And so this site was, as I said, inhabited very early on, having to do with various sort of the elder gods of Greece. And eventually, over time, the site was converted into the principal practice of the devotion to a new god, the god Apollo, and that happened around the 8th century BC. And there is some mythology associated with that. Apparently, when Apollo moved into the site, he did so by defeating the defender gods, chosen monsters or beasts or whatever they were. And essentially, it was a pair of serpents. And so serpents there is associated with the name Pythos, and that then gives you the term Pythia, which is kind of the, I believe, the elder name for this region here. And then the Pythia, therefore, actually becomes the name of the oracle at the main site here, the Oracle of Delphi, the mouthpiece for Apollo. So that's a bit of the history behind this. And yeah, speaking of oracles, this is going to be one of the most famous ones from antiquity, but there are a whole bunch of oracles in the past. They were essentially going to be just a small piece of the mechanics that is ancient religion in Greece. As we saw before, there's a lot of sites that are of religious importance to the Greeks because it allows you to be closer to the gods. So that's where you'd have temples, shrines, sanctuaries, where you could make your offerings and essentially get closer to the gods. But the oracles play an important part in that the oracles are going to be not just a way to approach the gods, but speak to them. So the oracles are going to be, the spokesman for the gods, the vessels for them. So as I said, the Oracle of Delphi being a very important one associated with the mouthpiece of Apollo, but you'd have other ones obviously for the various other gods like Zeus. One of the famous ones as well would have been the Oracle of Zeus Ammon. This one is going to be all the way out in the deserts of Egypt, actually out in Libya, in an oasis, the oasis of Siwa, and that's the one that Alexander the Great actually went to go visit when he was doing his conquest. He traveled out, nearly died in trying to get there, but when he approached the messengers, they essentially hailed him as the son of a god, and we don't know quite the contents of what the oracle divulged to him, but he came out there invigorated with his destiny. So these oracles were sought out by all sorts of powerful figures throughout antiquity, and were mouthpieces for various gods, and the one here is going to be the one associated with Apollo, and it became quite prominent in Greece, with the various Greek city-states coming to essentially get the help of Apollo, and you'd actually be having pilgrims from every walk of life coming as well. So that's what we're going to be doing right here, is joining the pilgrims on their way to the site here at Delphi. Looks like some children are going to be accompanying the pilgrims as well. So there would have been actually a city of Delphi, a local village nearby, and they played an important role, as we'll be covering. Basically, they tended to this site here. The women of Delphi, some of them were enrolled into the League of Priestesses that attended to the Temple of Apollo, and then of those, one was, or up to three actually, were selected to be the oracles at any given point in time. But anyways, before we get to that, let's talk about the monumental entrance here as we approach Delphi. So like I said, this is going to be a site where you want to speak to the gods, and anytime you want to do that in ancient Greece, well, you kind of have to bribe the gods a little bit. So you always are going to be bringing an offering to the gods in order for them to, well, to curry their favor and for them to listen to you a bit more. So that's what you're seeing here at the monumental entrance. The bull is always going to be representative of the bull sacrifice as well. You'll be seeing lots of, offerings on the side, pottery, animals in particular, equipment, gold, treasure, and all those sorts of things. But what you're seeing here also is going to be a whole assortment of statues. Now, these statues were going to be representative of kind of the treasures that were laid out as offerings to Apollo. Now, these big ones here at the very entrance are not necessarily something that you would see your average individual Greek offer, but these are going to be things that were probably offered by kings or city-states, because all of these various important powers would come here. And so whereas a noble might deposit here a small offering, an entire kingdom or city-state might offer a giant statue of gold or bronze or something of quite prominent importance. So those are going to be laid out in front of you. There's going to be additional treasuries that we're going to be looking at. So all sorts of stuff laid out. And you can imagine the impact that this, gives your average Greek who comes up here, basically, who might walk for a couple days or even weeks to get to the site. He brings his little treasure that means a lot to him, and he steps across this threshold and sees the offerings of kings and kingdoms, and it definitely puts him in his place. And this shows the importance of the site. So as we move forward, again, I'm going to remark on a little bit of the offerings here. This one in particular is going to be showing 7 different individuals. This is going to be an attestation to this old legend about the 7 commanders coming out of Argos, their legendary war between Argos and Thebes. These 7 commanders were said to fight and lead the armies of Argos. They marched on Thebes, and in front of the 7 gates of Thebes, each of these commanders walked out and was confronted by an enemy champion, and they all fought. Now, I believe most of the champions from Argos were killed, but in the aftermath of this conflict, essentially what happened is that their offspring, and another word for offspring is epigoni, I believe in Greek, their offsprings decided to avenge them, and 10 years later also rose up to do this war against Thebes. So this here attests to the cyclical war between Argos and Thebes, each of them in turn basically coming to the trying to seek favor from Apollo in the battle at hand for that decade and the following decade. So that's what this is kind of attesting to, this chronic fighting between the Greek city-states and them coming here to make their offerings. And that's what you would have seen here, is it's actually kind of a neutral site, interestingly enough, where you'd be seeing, yes, potential belligerents all come here to seek favor of the gods over one another. Now, when the Athenians, for instance, were at their their peak, you would have seen a lot of stuff from the Athenians. We'll be seeing a little bit further up a treasury of Athens that was dedicated and some various other things. So you'll be seeing here as you come and visit this site a layering of these treasures. Whoever is the greatest power at the time is going to be making the most offerings, and then as the next power takes over and gets to preeminence, they're going to be trying to layer their offerings over the site to curry favor with Apollo. And speaking of that, over here is going to be one of these treasuries. So, you could come over and you could dedicate a statue or maybe make some offerings, or you might even commission an entire structure be built and have it laid out with treasures. We can see a little bit of that inside here. So you can see a lot of one-upsmanship taking place. So that is going to be one of the treasuries. There's a bit more of a famous treasury up here, which is going to be the treasury offered by the Athenians, and this treasury here was meant to dedicate their victory over the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. So again, just to emphasize the fact that as a mere, peasant or even noble, you're going to come here with your trivial problems about your estate or whatever it is, and you come here and you see an offering of the entire Athenian people for their great victory over the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon. You're going to be put in your place. And there's a lot of little history in terms of these offerings. We'll be seeing something a little bit further about the Battle of Salamis, but over here, some other history as well, kind of tucked away in the corner. Over here, this is going to be a dedication of the Cnidians. So the Knidos was actually, there's a little bit of history to this that I have to explain. So essentially, Knidos is going to be a Greek city in southwest Anatolia, and they had colonies, just like much of the other Greeks that were spread out around the Mediterranean. One of those was over by Sicily, because that's where a lot of the Greeks went. It had a quite important positioning for control of maritime power. So anyways, Knidos had a colony in northeast Sicily, over in the Lipari Islands, and that colony there then grew into preeminence. They had their own fleet, and they fought against the Etruscans of northern Italy along the western seaboard of Italy for control of the trade, control of the region. And they fought with the Etruscans, big naval battle, and essentially the colony of Lipari ended up winning. And to celebrate their victory, they then made this dedication here all the way back in Delphi to Apollo. So this just goes to show the lengths that people would go to show their reverence and deference to Apollo and curry the favor. So all people from everywhere making their dedications and offerings. And you'd actually later on have even the Romans come over to seek the prophecies of the oracles. And we'll be going over, some of the intricacies of how those, the prophecy would work and how the oracle function would work. Over here, again, more treasuries, more altars. This here, I'll stop by here. This is going to be the Bouleuterion of Delphi. So again, as I said, Delphi was, not just the religious site, but actually a local village that tended to the site. And so a boule is essentially going to be the members of a council. They're elected. There would have been, for Delphi, 30, I believe, elected for a 1-year basis, and then there would have been another 15 that served for 6 months at a time, and then that would rotate, and they would then in turn basically handle the judicial and financial affairs of the town. And so this is, the boule is going to be an important feature of kind of local management of various areas. And that's one of those things that you have to keep in mind of when you hear of conquests around the world by Alexander or by the Romans or by whomever. Always on the local level, things do tend to stay the same. And so, if Alexander's in charge or the Romans are in charge, still at the end of the day, their rule does trickle down into the boules. And so this is what you would have seen quite prominently featured in a lot of the Greek cities and communities. So always keep in mind when you talk about these conquests, it all kind of filters down to these local administrative units. But as we move along, so talking a bit about maybe the history, a bit more of this site. So very early on, this site was believed, to have this early takeover by Apollo. He came in here, he defeated these ancient serpents and took over the site. And actually, I believe this Sphinx over here, over on the left, the Nexian Sphinx, it was located actually close to where they thought that Apollo defeated the serpents of the region. So all sorts of history enmeshed here. And then some other stuff about this site. Basically, he defeated the serpents. There was then the site became important religiously. And then actually what happened is in this area, like I said, there's those important streams. And there was actually a crevice or a crack in the earth in this site that actually had some important religious significance about fumes coming up out of the ground. And the story is that these fumes, essentially, a man, kind of like, we'll imagine this is a man. He has a bunch of his goats. He's a herder. He brings the goats into this area. One of them falls into the pit. The man here then goes into the pit to retrieve the goat. And actually he starts tripping. And it turns out that these fumes appear to have some sort of effect. The guy interprets it as being, the gods are now taking him over. He claims to be able to see the past, the present, and the future. He tells the locals about this. They form a shrine, and that then is what makes this site so important, is that it's a connection to the gods, and they then elect one of the local ladies, a female youth, we'll pretend it's maybe this lady. She's going to be the one who descends into the chasm and then is going to be the spokesman for the gods, and that's how you get kind of this priestess class that emerges from Delphi, and then of them, one is selected to be the Oracle of Delphi. So that's how this site kind of comes into preeminence. But as I've been saying that, maybe you've been looking around on the screen, and yes, right here you're going to be seeing the Portico of Athens. And this one is very impressive. So this one was dedicated after the Battle of Salamis, that one being a very famous naval battle fought against the Persians, where the Athenians and their allies proved victorious. And you can see here that they brought the defeated prow of their opponents, a Persian ship, and brought it here and deposited it again to Apollo. So this must have been once more quite the humbling experience. Just for context, the Romans did something similar when they defeated the Carthaginians during the Punic Wars. They stripped their ships of these the rostrums. They brought it back to Rome, and I believe in the Forum they cobbled these all together, the fronts of the ships, put it on the speaker's platform, and that you would have the speaker come up there and make his orations standing on top of the defeated prows of the enemies, and that's quite impressive, and it's why it's known as the rostrum today. So yeah, history enmeshed in everything. Doing a little dance here in the rain. And I love this. And again, you can see some altars to various other gods. Again, one of the things that you see a lot with these sanctuaries is, yes, there's going to be a main god, so in this case it's going to be Apollo, but often the other gods were worshipped as well. I believe Poseidon for a little while was worshipped at the site of Delphi. But anyways, presuming you're a pilgrim, you're going to continue to make your way up here, gawking at all the displays of wealth and former people who have come before you. You make your way up here. On the right is another example of a dedication. This one is going to be made again from the Athenian side in congratulations for their victory at Salamis. I believe in reality this statue would have been holding, again, a part of a ship. And then you do see a little bit more detail. So if I can go into like eagle mode here, take a look at this statue. Entwined snakes. And that is, again, a call out to the fact that they believe that when Apollo took over the site, he defeated the twin serpent guardians and there, I guess, entwined them around a pole. So lots of little history in every crack and crevice. But now we're finally approaching the last area, which is going to be the famous Temple of Apollo with the Oracle of Delphi on the inside. And you can see people here starting to line up. So let's talk about that. So you've made your approach, you're perhaps a peasant, a noble, or maybe even somewhat of higher stature. You now arrive here. There's going to be a big line because everyone wants to get their prophecy or get their answer directly from the gods, and there's going to be some way that the locals would organize this. So you'd have basically, bureau officials. Maybe I can see if I can take a seat here. There you go. Play the role. So they would sit here and basically people would come, tell you what they wanted to do. They would pay their taxes, you would jot it down, then you would take lots and basically sort out the order of who would come first. And of course, if anyone's coming here as a messenger from a city-state or from a kingdom, and especially if they bring a lot of treasure and tribute, well, then you can just bump them to the front of the line. So that's essentially your step one. And then after that, essentially what you have to do is you have to make preparations before you can even see the oracle. So part of that is going to have to do with getting these leaves, laurel leaves, I believe they would be burned, making various other offerings, doing some stuff directed by the priestesses, and the priests. And then, of course, an important thing is going to be the altar here where you make your sacrifice prior to entering. That's one of the prominent features with ancient Greek religion is that you have these temples, but unlike, modern religions where a lot of the religious activity takes place within the temple, for the Greeks, actually, you would make your offerings and your prayers outside, and all of this would normally take place around the altar. So let's assume, we've paid our dues, we're first in line, now we're going to make our way to the top. So typically you'd bring your offering up to the altar here. It might be like, a goat or something. You would lay it on the altar here. Kill it, perhaps with this ritual dagger or knife. It gets killed. Then what you do after that is you make some of the offering, it's going to go to the gods. So traditionally that's going to be the fats and the bones. You're going to put those into, you're going to burn those up. As they burn, the smoke goes up and that is going to go up to the god. So that's the portion of the sacrifice that goes to the god. The rest of it is actually going to be taken to the side. That's going to be the meats. And then you take those meats and you cut them up, you grill them up, and then the meats you then consume yourself, and then you also distribute to the rest of your congregation and whomever else is going to be partaking in that ritual. And that's one of the important features of kind of the Greek diet that's interesting, is that they actually, most of the times, did not get access to meat. A lot of the times they were eating stuff that was, based off of grains or vegetables or fruit, or a lot of the times eating from the sea. Meat was relatively rare, and the main source of meat was actually from these religious offerings, where you would come and either it's your offering or you come to someone else's offering and you partake in the meat. So yeah, that's where most of the people would have gotten their source of meat. Anyways, once that is done, you have the priests kind of looking on. They assess whether or not the offering has been accepted. They read the omens, perhaps of the entrails, or how the sacrifice kind of reacted when you put holy water. All of that goes on to say whether or not you can proceed to the next step. If they say that no, this is not good omens, then perhaps you have to come back another day. Or maybe even if the oracle is not available, then what you could presumably do would be to talk to the priestesses, and they actually had the ability to give you a limited answer from the gods, although instead of giving you like something full in terms of like a sentence or anything like that, they would actually just tell you a yes or a no. But again, let's make some more assumptions that everything has gone according to plan. You can finally now approach the famed Temple of Apollo with the oracle inside. Across the outside, decorations representative of Greek mythology. Then you're going to make your way in. Over here, we do see that there are some guards here. The temple probably would have been, maybe lightly guarded, but this is a site of great reverence that was, respected by all the Greeks and people abroad, and no one would really try and rob or combat this temple. So not much need for it to be defended in most occasions, although I do have to say that historically, I believe Thracian barbarians did make their way down here eventually during like the Roman era, and made way with the temple's treasures. So yeah, maybe the guards are going to be here at some point. But for the most part, it was going to be like a religiously neutral and militaristically neutral site. And now we make our way inside of the temple. This is going to be, the Holy of Holies. Looks like they're going to light some of this for us. But yeah, again, you can see lots of treasures and more things burning in here. perfumes, incense, all this kinds of stuff, just to, again, supplicate the god even more. And then as you approach yet further, now here you can see the great Oracle of Delphi. As I stated before, there would have been, maybe one chosen oracle amongst the priestesses of Delphi, but sometimes there were up to 3, and the oracle would be here. She served basically for life. I believe once she was dead from natural causes or whatever, she would have been replaced by another one who was elected. But while she serves here, she's going to be seeing to the religious activities of the temple, and most importantly, being the spokesperson for the god. She would have revealed prophecy for 9 out of the 12 months of the year. I believe during the winter months, it was believed that Apollo left the site, and so too did she, no longer answering prophecy. But otherwise, during the year, she would answer these prophecies. Every month, she had to go ahead and do, I believe on the 7th day, a purification of herself. And that involved going to kind of the local streams and springs, bathing naked, drinking of the pure waters. There would be other priests seeing over her, chanting rituals. She had a purple veil, and then finally came back into the site, purified, ready to serve as a channel to the gods. Seat herself just about here. She had a special seat that she sat on, and this is where the pilgrims would come in and ask her questions. Now, like I said early on, kind of the early story of this was that, hey, there were these fumes in the ground, and that's what caused them to form this first religious site. According to some of the sources that I referred to, apparently in the temple itself there was a grate in the ground somewhere that allowed the fumes from kind of under the earth to come up and suffuse this area. And that doesn't seem to be represented here. Perhaps maybe downstairs they have a grates, but I kind of doubt it. Yeah, so you don't see it here, but that is that would have been, the fumes coming up here, believing that that's godly powers. And there has been some theorizing about, hey, what was in those fumes? So far, no one has been able to say definitively, these fumes were definitely something with hallucinogenic properties. We can't confirm that, but that is, kind of a popular theory that people like to bandy about, but not at all confirmed. And actually, I do want to mention while we're up here a little bit of the decorations here. So you can see Apollo vanquishing the defender serpent, the python here. And that's, again, where we derive the name Pythia, and that is the name of the oracle here, the Pythia, named after the site because of the association with Apollo. But, like I said, okay, so you come to the oracle. Some priests and priestesses would help you formulate your question properly. You would then come in here, give her your question, and then she would try and give you an answer. And so there's a lot of, this oracle would serve for hundreds of years. And so the way she answered was very much different over the years. The oracle, when she was chosen, could be someone who was perhaps very literate, very well-to-do, very educated, noble. Or, on the other hand, there were instances where she was, an illiterate peasant. And you had the range. Maybe she was young, old, rich, poor, all sorts of backgrounds. So that would definitely impact the way she imparted her lessons. There were times when, there were the rich and powerful when she was the priest, and so when she was in power, at that point in time, her answers would have been a bit more formulaic. We have references to them being delivered in, poetic form in hexameter, or perhaps, she whispered something to the priests who in turn delivered that into hexameter for you. Or if she was maybe on the more peasant side, she might, and maybe if the rumors of the fumes were accurate, there's actually some historical records of them going into these trances where they would just spout gibberish, which in turn had to be translated. And that's what's, capitalized on in movies like 300, where that seems to be the norm, where they're in some sort of trance and they whisper and it gets translated. That is something that is the case, but was not necessarily the norm. There were cases where the oracle would give you a very forward message. Although I do want to caveat that a bit. So yeah, that's how it was delivered. But as for the message itself, these oracles like to say stuff that was ambiguous. So a lot of the times, the oracle would give you messages that would essentially be a win-win no matter the outcome. So one of the famous examples is essentially a guy who comes up here. There's a war brewing. He wants to know whether or not he should go on campaign. He comes and he asks her a question, should I go on campaign? And apparently the answer that comes out of the oracle is as follows. She says, go, return, not die in war. And so you could take that two different ways. She could be saying, you're going to go, you're going to return, and you're going to not die in war. Or you could take it as go, return not, die in war. So he comes to the oracle and she says this thing that's going to be ambiguous about, hey, go in war, and you could take it as you're going to die or you're not going to die. And so that's kind of the way the oracles, a lot of the times, the more famous sayings would go. There's another famous one about Croesus of Lydia. He's a great king there who was quite powerful, and he was actually in the business of going about testing the various oracles. What he did is he sent a bunch of messages to these various oracles around the Mediterranean, and basically the challenge was, hey, what am I doing right now? And then they had all to write back his answers. And apparently the Oracle at Delphi, and I believe one other, got it correct. And basically their answer was something to the effect that he's boiling turtles at this point in time over a bronze pot. And apparently that was correct. And that showed that the Oracle at Delphi was, yes, the true spokesman of the gods. Croesus then asked the question, should I make war on the Persians? And again, you get the cryptic answer saying, if you make war on the Persians, that will cause the downfall of a great kingdom. And again, very ambiguous. Is the kingdom in question there going to be the Persians, or is it going to be Croesus's own kingdom of Lydia? So those are a lot of the times the answers. But sometimes you'd have the oracle that would be less ambiguous. So for instance, when the Athenians had the Persians bearing down at them during the Greco-Persian Wars, they came to the oracle and they said, oh my God, what should we do? How should we take action? And she basically flat out says something to the effect of blood is going to run down from the rafters, all these dark signs. And she says, essentially, fly, you fools, a very Gandalfian quote. Basically unambiguously saying run for the hills. And the Greeks don't really like that. They try and get her to answer differently, but she doesn't really budge. Eventually they do and get an interpretation from the mouth of Zeus, and Zeus says something to the effect of, a wall of wood alone will protect you. And again, being very ambiguous, what does that mean? Perhaps the wall of wood is going to be a literal wall in Athens that's going to defend you. I believe when the Persians came to Athens and they sacked it, there were some fanatics in Athens who walled themselves up in a wooden wall and defended to the last, believing it would protect them. It didn't. Others would interpret this defensive wooden wall to be actually the fleet of Athens, and that proved to be a little bit more true in the sense that, the fleet of Athens and their allies helped defeat the Persians at Salamis. So that's kind of that's the nature of these oracles. Later, I believe you even had Philip of Macedon come in here, ask some questions. The response is essentially, silver spears will help you conquer the world. Apparently, he then went and conquered some silver mines, which then helped fund his campaigns in the conquest of Greece. Later on, you have Alexander the Great who comes here. He tries to get an answer from the oracle. Apparently, she doesn't really give him an answer at all, or the one that he wants. He then apparently drags her by the hair out the temple, and in doing so, she kind of yells at him as she's being dragged. Oh, you are essentially immortal one. And that's kind of the answer he wants to hear, that he's going to be descended from the gods. So that's kind of how the oracle worked. So working in mysterious ways here. So quite interesting history. And that's about it from what I wanted to cover. I think we've covered a lot about this site. I mean, I can go out here and explore perhaps a little bit more. I mean, there's more to the site. If you want to go ahead and visit in discovery mode for yourself, there's more to this area. Up at the top, there's going to be this famous... Let me get over here. Let me get even closer so you can see it. Yeah, famous theater where people can come see plays. So this is going to be something that's for, the local residents of Delphi, but then also you'd assume all the delegations that come here that want to be entertained, see great plays, and you can see a lot of people putting on maybe even a religious ceremony as well. So that's going to be about it for our journey to Delphi, going all the way up to the Oracle of Delphi and talking about some of the details and the inner workings there. So I hope you guys did enjoy this one. I really loved researching this and sharing it with you. And definitely share it with others in the community. I love this, and I love word getting out about the history that can be found in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And let me know in the comments below what you'd like for me to explore next. Thank you so much. See you in the next one. Peace out.